yo, what it do, what it do. It's your boy Yellow the Poet here, and today I have Mr. Ben Oofana. He is definitely one of the basically a medicine doctor, and oh my goodness, he definitely dabbles in mental health issues, healing the bodies, mind, broken hearts, and definitely deep emotional wounds. So today we're going to get into it. We're going to talk to Mr. Ben Oofana, and we're going to learn more about what Ben does. Welcome to YTP Entertainment, Ben. We greatly appreciate you, and thank you so much for being on the show.
Hey, Yellow. Thank you for bringing me on today.
Yes, indeed. No doubt. No doubt. So please enlighten us. Let us know what are some of the things that you got going on so far.
Well, a few things about my background. From a very early age, I was drawn to Native Americans and peoples of other indigenous cultures. Somehow, growing up, looking around, and it felt as though there had to be more to life. I'd see people getting up to go to school and to work and come home, and in much of the country, people come home and stare into the idiot tube in the evenings and in those days, and now it's like they're scrolling on their devices or social media, all that. And I just felt like there had to be so much more.
Mhm.
And in my teens, when I began to hear about the traditional Native American doctors, the men and women that possess with it, that power they refer to as medicine, and I was just thinking like, wow, if I ever have the opportunity, this is what I'm going to do with my life. And so by the time I was 17, I took off on my own, still in high school. My car got me as far as Oklahoma, not quite to Arizona where I intended to go, but I felt this strong resonance with the Kiowa people. I ended up sitting up in peyote meetings all through the night with these native elders, and it was in the meetings I first met my mentor, Horace Delkai, who's one of the last surviving traditional doctors among the Kiowa tribe. And I was afraid that he would just say, well, this only works for Native people, good luck there. But when I asked him if he would take me as an apprentice, I was physically shaking and afraid he would dismiss me. But he just says, can you start fasting? And still shaking, like, yeah, sure. I have abbreviated the story though, but in a few months' time after finishing that semester of college, I made my way out to the Navajo reservation where he lived with his wife, and I would go out with him as he was working with some of his patients. And then at times a lot of these traditional Native doctors possess paranormal abilities. And so he would transmit portions of his own healing gifts to me. And when you receive these gifts of healing, you have to earn the right to work with them. You can't just run with the ball. And so typically the vision quest is something like about 4 days and nights, no
Mhm.
food, no water, alone in the mountains.
Mhm.
And so he would have me fasting after transmitting these gifts, and then later on my own I started going and have continued, for, let's see, over 30 years,
Okay.
going like twice a year. And then in addition, I years later I began to train with a master from China, Shifu Li Tai Liang, in the internal martial arts of Xing Quan, Baguazhang, Tai Chi, Qigong.
Woo-hoo.
And so combining all these things, it's because there's no one thing that does everything. We have
Exactly.
multiple facets of ourselves, and we need to
Yes.
develop our body and mind. And in these different traditions, they give you the means through which you can develop your
Mm.
body your physical body, your mind, develop emotionally, develop that connection to the higher power, build a much stronger foundation.
Yes.
And when you train in these disciplines, you see these individuals who have attained mastery, and they do hours of intensive daily practice. So you're continually building that foundation, like those internal arts masters. And these internal martial arts had their roots in Taoism. And some of these individuals who attain mastery, they possess such extraordinary power. If you were to strike them, they redirect that force back into your body,
Yes.
causes internal injury. If they strike you, it could literally rupture internal organs or break bones. They don't go looking for a fight. It's just, you just continually develop that power. And China, for so many years, is very lawless. And they were their own law enforcement. They had these hordes of Mongols, that were invading from the north at times. And so it was a matter of
Yes.
survival that they developed these these disciplines. And then too, another whole different aspect is that receiving this transmission from my mentor, Horace, when you receive that medicine, those powers, is carrying a lot of trauma from my own childhood and adolescence. And as I began to work with people, it was like pouring hydrogen peroxide into an infected wound. My mentor said to me one time, he said, "You're going to get way up there. You're going to be extraordinarily good. But in the meantime, you're going to really scrape bottom, because if you don't, you will never understand the suffering of the people you're working with." And so all that emotional wounding, that trauma was coming out. And a lot of it was coming out in relation to, or my attempts to form relationships.
Yes.
And when you carry this kind of trauma, often what happens is you end up forming attachments to individuals who, in many ways, reenact the traumas of your past. And so as that happened, somehow instinctively, I knew to dive into the depth of the pain, and I would just be fully immersed in that, all that incapacitating, painful emotion, but I would just keep breathing from the depth of it. At a certain point, I could feel it breaking open and coming out of my body in waves. And as that happened, I began to experience this profound warmth from within, this sense of connectedness to a higher power. And over time, the thing is, like, you work through the pain, you gradually work through the pain. It was a combination of practice and intervention, like the deep tissue body work with gifted healers, and going through the vision quest. But eventually it led me to develop a whole intensive series of meditation practices that, as I did so, I've been teaching these practices to people for decades now.
Awesome. Awesome. That is awesome. I love it. I love it. So, out of all the teachings that you have done, how many would you say actually are getting it versus those who are not getting it?
People who actually get it, you're saying? It is challenging sometimes, because working in this culture, in I refer to it as Wonder Bread culture sometimes, because we have this white bread with its supposed, well, we have all kinds of garbage, artificial food substitutes that people mistakenly assume are food that they put into their bodies, and they're like not good for you in any way, and and lead to all kinds of damage in one way or another.
That's true.
Yeah.
That's true.
Yeah, just obesity, and just all this plaque accumulating, and just stroke and heart disease. Just, I mean, just take inflammation, inflammatory disorders, they take their toll on our physical health and all. But there are just so many aspects of our culture, and I feel it has gotten much more challenging. When I first started working years ago, I remember I was in New Mexico, and New Mexico people can be a little flighty, spacey, and there wasn't all that much consistency back then. But when I first went into Boston, for instance, and I remember doing a radio interview, and the phone starts ringing off the hook, and even after the show, the calls continue to come in, and people were scheduling appointments. And I've worked with many of these same people for indefinitely, sometimes a decade or more. And what was amazing is that I would come into town and I would have 2-3 weeks of appointments set up ahead of time. And openings that I had would fill up. And I would be exhausted by the time I got out of town because I'd be working my ass off. But the amazing thing was people would schedule sometimes one or multiple sessions, and it'd be maybe 3 months before I got back to town, but it would initiate this whole progression of change taking place in their body, physically, mentally, emotionally. And I get back to town, and people would remember what took place in the previous session and the ensuing process of change that occurred. And so we would just pick up where we left off. And then what happened when all this distractive technology, smartphones and social media, is that people's attention spans literally went to shit. It just, this it's this technologically induced attention deficit that resulted. And with that, I found that I needed to get people back in, like either the next day or within the next week. Otherwise, they were so distracted that they just didn't remember. And
Goodness.
yeah, and so instead of this consistency, a lot of times people would show up once or a few times and they would disappear. And it's disheartening on many levels. One, I ended up having to work like 10 times harder. But on the other hand, the fact that there's this emotional wounding that goes in many instances way back into early childhood, adolescence, all these difficult, stressful, traumatic, deeply wounding events, anything from going through breakups and divorces and whatever abuse they suffered as a child or their teens, and experiences of being rejected, losing their job and not knowing how they're going to survive, and just overwhelming financial stress, death of a loved one or multiple loved ones, and all these things. And people internalize these deeply wounding experiences. And a big part of it is because so many people, they've never learned to work constructively with their emotions. And so what they do is they tend to deny, disconnect, suppress what they're feeling. They distract themselves, all of that. And so the emotions they don't process get trapped in their bodies. And it accumulates. It just keeps building up. And we all have this authentic core being that resides within us. And what happens is that as the hurt, the anger, the frustration, the stress, and we don't digest or process that, it just keeps building layer upon layer. And that core being that resides within us just gets covered over. People get more disconnected, and the stress, the emotion that doesn't get processed, it saturates the organs, the tissues, the cells of the body. They don't function as well. They're bogged down. If you walk into a room and someone's angry or upset without them saying a word, you feel it at times. And that's because emotion has a certain force or presence or power or substance to it. And so when we don't process the emotion stress and it stays in our bodies, it becomes this heavy, congestive, dense residual that just hangs out there. And And when it sits there, it like, you know, initially when it's in that acute stage, it's this presence, it has presence or force.
Right.
But as it sits there, it congeals, it becomes denser, more heavy, more congestive. And then it settles into the bodies, the cells, the tissues, the organs. And as I work with people individually, what I find that happens is it takes all that backlog, that stagnation that's backed up in the body, and it's taking it, it's transforming, it's transmuting it in a way. So the emotions come up, the emotions from childhood, from adolescence, from these, from the breakups they've gone through, from those other experiences like physical or sexual assault or combat experience, all these things, the emotions come back, the memories come back. But the thing is, it's taking it, it's transforming it, transmuting it in a way so that it's more digestible. And as that happens, it's becomes fuel for growth. And so you begin to develop this foundation, you become stronger, more resilient. Your body also becomes more resilient. So there's this greater strength.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. Now,
Let me go ahead and talk a minute. I just had this flash like, oh, I didn't turn my phone ringer down. So ask me the question. I'm listening. I'm just going to reach over and get it. Is that okay?
no problem. No problem.
Okay, do that real quick.
So, throughout all the years that you've been doing this, how long do you think that it would take a person to start to heal?
It starts place immediately as I'm working with people.
Ooh,
Th-
ooh.
Yeah, there's one, I teach this whole intensive series of meditation practices.
Mhm.
So as I'm teaching these practices, you're learning to work constructively with your authentic emotional responses. So whatever you've gone through, whether say you're in the midst of a breakup, or you're struggling with patterns of abandonment, unrequited love. And so I will walk people through these practices. And as you work with these practices, it's enabling you to process or digest this lived experience, where you're getting jerked around or whatever abuses or you might have suffered, or this confusion where you don't know whether to stay or go, what to do with that person. And you gain clarity. And I see a lot of people, for instance, they're trapped in a abusive relationship, or they're getting strung out, strung along, and they're processing these emotions. They're gaining that clarity, insight, and understanding. And
Yes.
I've seen a lot of people evolve where they let go of those unhealthy attachments and come up into establish, or they attract someone into their life with whom they could co-create more meaningful and deeply fulfilling relationships.
Mhm.
I see people who've experienced major setbacks, again, maybe they've lost a job. I mean, even myself, for instance, there have been all these shocks that I've encountered in my own, eh, like working, like, okay, here people get on this distractive technology. It's like I have to completely adapt and find different ways to work. There's the financial crash, 2008 and 9, bottom fell out from under me. There's a whole nother with COVID. And I used to do classes on a weekly basis, New
Mhm.
York every week, Boston every other week. And that's how I kept my practice going. Now I have to adapt. That's why I'm here on this podcast, for instance. It's like I have to reach people somehow.
Yes,
But
indeed.
yeah, but even things like, say, someone's injured in an automobile accident,
Mhm.
and as I'm working with them, the traditional Native American doctors, other indigenous healers, we work as conduits. So we have this extraordinarily powerful presence working through us. So as I'm working with an individual, for instance, some people actually feel a process that feels like reconstruction taking place in the body to facilitate the healing of these injuries. Like one guy is going through an intersection, hit broadside, the force is great enough, the seatbelt snapped, and he's like flying into the air, spinning. Huge road rash, flesh worn away on his right side, his leg, hunched over in a lot of pain. And even after the first session, he was able to go back to work doing construction. Before he said physical pain or the physical therapy itself was like torture. And when I knew his sister and mom when I ran into him, his mom in Whole Foods, and she told me he was out in the car. I brought him into Whole Foods Market, and Santa Fe is a little different. So I had this little area, and I would sit, and I'm able to read through I can look into people's bodies and minds. I scan the body and mind with my hand, and I have this internal vision. I could see what kinds of issues a person's dealing with, how they're struggling emotionally, the resources they have. And so I would help people, teach them how these practices to work through difficult emotions and to tap into the inner strength and resources so that they could navigate the more difficult or challenging situations they encountered in their life. So I sat him down in a chair and just working in the middle of Whole Foods, trying not to be too conspicuous. I had this little enclosed area, though.
Right.
And he's like, wow, this is the first thing that's even helped. I could feel the pain being pulled out of my body.
That's
So,
awesome. Very
yeah,
awesome.
even things like digestive disorders, which for the most part respond fairly well, like colitis or Crohn's disease, IBS. For example, a man who's a great deal of abdominal pain, passing blood in his stools. And after working with him, I think it was like 5, 6 sessions, he's no longer in pain, no longer passing blood. And get some of these individuals after working with them, they could eat pretty much what they want within reason, of course. But so, yeah, now healing starts immediately, but there are factors to consider, and it varies with each person. The receptivity, the responsiveness. I've spent a great deal of time in India and Sri Lanka, and there's something I refer to as malleability. And there's a profound difference when I'm in different areas, different parts of the country or states or the world and such, culturally. And when you have, some of the different factors, when we're overstimulated, all this, when we're gorging on all this, we have our devices and we're scrolling all the time, and it's all this added sensory input because your body, mind, you have to digest your lived experience, all this sensory input that's going in.
Exactly.
And so with that, you when your brain, mind, your body is so overwhelmed, it impedes your ability to process or digest your own lived experiences and your subsequent cognitive and emotional responses. If you're eating garbage food, a lot of refined sugar, if you're self-medicating with food, eating way too damn much, because there's stuff you don't want to feel, and so you're packing it, stuffing your face, and your body, then that has a numbing effect. If you're doing too much caffeine can be very numbing, especially you do too much of it. It anesthetizes us to some degree to our emotions. Smoking cigarettes, smoking lots of weed. If you're drinking lots of alcohol, other recreational drugs, alcohol is a drug too, like it or not, it is.
It is.
Pharmaceuticals, where especially like with antidepressants, anti-anxiety, um, other psychotropic meds. And some people, if there's psychiatric issues where they could be a danger to themselves or others, medications may be the best known solution for some people.
Okay.
And yet I do find that many people are on antidepressants and anti-anxiety meds, especially if there's a history of trauma, and for a number of reasons. One, not having learned to work constructively with their emotions. If you've experienced these deeply wounding events and you carry those incredibly distressing emotions in your body and you haven't learned to work constructively with your emotions, you can easily find yourself overwhelmed, consumed by the emotions. And that's why I teach people how to work with these emotions to make them more manageable. You can digest these emotions and lived experiences. It all becomes fuel for growth. And the other factor is, in our modern day world, in our Wonder Bread culture, we haven't, rarely do you find anyone who possesses these kinds of gifts of healing, say, that I work with, that the indigenous doctors work with, that will take these deeply wounding traumatic experiences, soften, diffuse, transform these experiences to highly charged emotions. You're literally digesting it like the food you eat. And as you do that, then it's no longer so overwhelming.
Right.
It's no longer blowing you out of the water. It's like, as it becomes fuel for growth, you're building this foundation. You develop strength, resilience, this ability to be present. I've worked with people over the years, severely traumatized. And in working with people, they become calmer, more at ease. They get to where they could function.
Yes.
And have stable, healthy relationships, hold down a job,
Yeah.
and assume positions of responsibility that are very demanding and function quite well. Oh, I did mention the malleability, the responsiveness. So there's, on one hand, all the ways that we numb and disconnect ourselves. One, we self-medicate or we do pharmaceuticals. There's also the fact that we suppress our emotions, we distract ourselves, we don't want to go there, we don't want to look at that. No, we need to face it, deal with it head on. And so even suppressing our emotions or distracting ourselves, body is not as responsive when we do that. That's one of the main reasons. When I start the sessions off, I'm taking people in, getting them deep into their emotions, teaching them these practices. They're working with their emotions, they're becoming more manageable, but the body also becomes so much more malleable, so much more responsive. Now, a lot of people's bodies are so saturated by all the stress and all the backlog of emotions they haven't processed.
Definitely.
And so some people, like the first few sessions, say 2, 3 to 4 sessions, it's maybe even 5, we're just cleaning out this backlog. And some people, after sessions, they're in the toilet, their bodies are purging, coming out either or both ends.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. But as
Goodness.
the sessions progress, their bodies start becoming softer, more malleable. And 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 that's when they could really feel this presence, this power going in, and physically doing corrective work, whether they're suffering from heart disease or stroke or some digestive disorder, or just carrying just this long history of stress, trauma, and other deeply wounding experiences.
So when you started off with the meditation, How long did it take you before you were able to master being able to meditate?
In the beginning, I was just flailing blindly. It was just, I was consumed by all this overwhelming,
Mm-hmm.
excruciating pain. And a lot of it was being triggered because I was forming attachments to women who were themselves deeply wounded at the time.
Right.
And and especially if we have this history of trauma that goes way back, not only are we experiencing the immediate emotional response from what's happening, what's our relationship that's blowing up or not working or wanting to be
Right.
with someone. Okay, so there's that. But we're experiencing the emotion from this long history we have of past trauma and other wounded experiences. So there are times where I would just be consumed by those emotions, even for hours, but I would just keep breathing from the depth of the pain. And and then finally it would break open. I could feel it coming out of my body in waves and those emanations of warmth coming from within. That process accelerated as I continued because what happens is that collective massive pain diminishes as we keep digesting more of it.
Yes.
And so there's less pain and our body and mind's innate healing intelligence, it becomes it develops to a greater extent. It becomes more effective than it was initially. And and then over time, there was a lot of experimentation, a lot of exploration, and much of it because of my own being very intuitive, this deeper instinctual knowing. So in one instance, I was seeing someone about the time I turned 30, and she gave me the ultimatum. She wanted me to move in. She wanted to start a family. But
Oh
I'm
goodness.
not commitment adverse, but for some reason, I didn't feel that maybe she wasn't the right person for me to do that with or something. But I still loved and cared deeply about her and wanted to always have her in my life in some context. When she got into another relationship and he says, if you have to be friends with your ex, I will leave you. She cut off everything. I felt this profound deadness in my chest cavity because I have this loyalty thing. I can be deeply loyal to people who are a part of my life. And so late at night, driving from Santa Fe back to Albuquerque, I would be breathing into that deadening, felt almost nothing at first, then little faint vapors of feeling. Night after night, it got stronger, loneliness, emptiness, longing, a whole torrent of feeling pouring out of my chest. I felt like my whole chest cavity was aching. And then eventually this profound euphoric feelings pouring through, again, that connectedness to a higher power. And that was one of many practices I developed later going down into my abdomen, deep in the intestines. And there's this whole deeper instinctual consciousness there. Before I was too much in my head. And what I found is it pulled me down into my body. So I became much more rooted in my body. Before being in my head, I was way up here and just naive and ungrounded. And but as it pulled me down into my body, not only could I hear what people said, I could feel where they were coming from. I could feel their incongruencies, where they were saying one thing, but their intentions were different, or maybe they just
Yes.
didn't have what it took to be congruent themselves.
Mhm.
And so as I did that, I was also getting a deeper instinctual sense of like, oh, here's what I need to be doing. Like we can get like all kinds of insights or inspirations, but a lot of times it's not very grounded. But from here in our abdomen, we get this gut bodily sense of like, oh, this is what I need to be doing, this deeper sense of purpose. And so as I was working within the abdomen, that got stronger. Another version is a lot of us collect enormous amounts of stress and tension in parts of our body. For me, the worst of it was neck shoulders and upper back. And as I learned to bring my awareness, and I would focus intently in these muscle groups.
Mhm.
And it took time. I focused on that intently, my main focus for about 6 months.
Wow.
And I could just feel this layers of emotional body armoring just
Mhm.
dissolving. And the massage therapist that worked with me was shocked. It's like, what have you been doing? Normally it takes an hour or more to get this to open up, and after all that work, it just contracts and goes back where it was. And this time it
Right.
opens, it's staying in place. And now we have time to work on all these other areas of your body. And even doing that, a lot of emotion that had been trapped in the musculature in these areas, it was
Yes.
releasing, it was coming up into my conscious awareness.
Mhm.
So it's an ongoing process.
Mhm.
And and so much of our focus is pulled outwards, and the distractive technology, what
Mhm.
it's doing is it triggers the brain's dopamine reward cycle. And and so it makes us so that we're constantly seeking the next reward and the next reward, this next little hit of excitement. But
Yep.
that makes us very shallow, superficial. We
Mhm.
skitter along the surface of reality, but we're losing that capacity for depth, for introspection.
You're
And
right.
we need that in order to process our life experiences, to learn, to grow, to evolve, to see what we're doing instead of just running through life with a blindfold on, not knowing what we're getting ourselves into.
That is so true. Oh my goodness. I was I was one of the children that was always knee deep into my troubles because I didn't have a good foundation. I didn't have a good relationship with my parents.
Mhm,
And it made it tough for me to actually interact or deal with other people when that happened.
mhm,
So I had to actually just figure out a way to actually humble myself. And I was introduced to meditation
mhm,
through working with one of the guys. He was my sensei um, in Islam because I was
mhm,
studying Islam, just learning about the practice, not actually being a actual member of being a Muslim. I was just studying and learning more about the practice because I was always into learning about different religions, how they work, how they operate, how they
mhm,
function, and why so many people are so engulfed into them. That was my thing. I wanted to understand that instead of being able to say something negative about it or say something positive about it and not actually know what I'm talking about.
mhm,
So being into the negative aspects of things where I wasn't happy with my family situation, it made me look at things differently. I was not really optimistic. I was more pessimistic than anything. But once I learned to meditate and get focused and understand more about meditation and how it works, it made me a better person. Not only that, but also just taking the advice from my grandmother because my grandmother was the one that raised me.
mhm.
Taking advice from my grandmother always had something positive or something informative, or she would tell a story about things that happened to her as she was growing up, and it helped a lot. It really did. It helped a whole lot. So I learned a lot from that.
There's this huge gaps in our modern day world and our cultures that we've grown up in. And I see and I hear continually about the the crazy ass dysfunctions that we've grown up in as individuals, the abuses,
Mhm.
like I heard some things from my mom about my great grandfather and how he identified as, yeah, he's very steeped in his Christian religion.
Mhm.
And yet he was extraordinarily abusive. I mean, he just brutally beat his children, and yet he thought he was a godly man. And there was one point, I, I think this was it in the 1920s, I think? Again, this is my great-grandfather. And in those days, they had dynamite, and he was actually blowing up stumps. And he went back to check, and he got to, when it didn't blow up, and he went back to check, and it did go off when he got too close, and it killed him. And there were like 14 siblings. You know, no birth control. They breed like rabbits. And that's part of the reason why our world is so dangerously overpopulated today. And but the fact that in so many of our families that there was not any kind of practice as far as meditation, you had these religions and these, like, here you had, you know, as human beings, we're these extraordinarily complex beings, and you have this book, you know, the Bible, you know, when people read the book and there's all this scripture. And I don't mean to attack anyone's religion, but I want to talk about from a more psychological standpoint, is that
I'm not a religious person, so I understand.
yeah. Well, growing up in the church and suffering a lot of abuses, you know, literally they'd be dogpiling me in the front of the church and trying to cast Satan out of me just because they sensed I was different in some way. And I was like, yeah, it was very creepy, very invasive. And so I had a lot of, you know, needing to put my head back together after that whole ordeal, or maybe put it together for the first time. But the fact that a lot of people, what happens is there's this lack, there's this, people have not having any understanding or this practice to really get in touch with this inner core being. And working with our emotions. People don't understand that okay, we have our body, our mind, and, you know, there's cognitive intellectual intelligence, but there's this emotional intelligence. And as we work constructively with our emotions, we process them, and there's the, you know, the intellectual, mental, cognitive processing, so the emotional and the cognitive processing. And so we face issues, we're dealing with them, we're working through these issues or challenges. And as we do that, it helps to build this foundation. We're growing, we're maturing. And so there is, in many instances, people, you know, they adopt whatever religious or spiritual belief, but there's what you call spiritual bypass, you know, where they think they're in some ways exempt, like not wanting to go there. If they experience strong and pleasant, what they label as negative emotions, hurt, anger, resentment, and it's like, oh, that's of the devil. And it's like, no, it's not. These are your authentic emotional responses, and you need to learn to work constructively with them, because there's no God that's just going to take it away. And they say, you need to forgive. It's like, and your conscious mind could like, yes, I forgave him. I forgave her. And your conscious mind would be like this, really small. And your subconscious would fill the whole room in comparison. It's far more powerful, way more vast. And your conscious mind says, yes, I forgave him. I forgave her. Your subconscious is like, yeah, you're totally full of shit, man. I don't buy that for a second. And people will tell me like, yes, I forgave him. I forgave her. It's like, really? Okay, maybe. Well, let's check this out. Close your eyes. Close your eyes. Picture that individual. See them. Feel their presence. And as I have them do so, and all these emotions come out, and they're sitting there with their eyes closed, and they're like, so how does that feel? It's like, I want to choke the I want I want to punch them in the face. I want to choke the living shit out of them. So it's like, well, so much for that forgiveness.
Right, exactly.
So I think it's important to be authentic instead of, There is a philosopher, Pythagoras, who said, custom and nature do
Yeah.
not agree, for the many formed custom
Mhm.
without understanding nature.
Yeah.
Again, custom and nature do not agree, for the many formed custom without understanding nature. So we have these religions and these societal norms, or what we should do or how we should be, but
Yes.
people are just clueless. A nice Southern expression: they don't know their asshole from a hole in the ground. They don't understand their bodies. They don't understand their minds. They're so off in their heads. They're so disconnected. And so
Yeah.
they don't process their emotions. They
Yeah.
lack emotional intelligence. They don't have a deep introspective meditation practice. And so
Mhm.
they're lost. They're clueless. There's the punk band years ago, the Sex Pistols, and they had the song Pretty Vacant. And, we're so pretty, oh, so pretty, pretty
Yes.
vacant. And it's this, there are ways in which a lot of people are lost or clueless
Mhm.
and just
Absolutely.
lacking in so many respects understanding of their own bodies and
Yes.
minds. So
Yes.
we need these practices like the meditation.
Mhm.
And then as you get into other cultures, like as for me, going and living among the Kiowa people and having the opportunity to train with this native doctor, this medicine man, and to go on the vision quest. And I'll be on the mountain the 4 days and nights. This extraordinarily powerful presence comes into my body. And past traumas, many of which I'd completely forgotten about, and it would all be coming back up. I'd be reliving those experiences, the emotions, all the vivid sensory impressions. I'd
Yeah.
be digesting all this
Yeah.
insanity, dysfunction I grew up with, and the traumas and all the emotions, and gained tremendous insight. And hear all that had been stored in my body, held in my subconscious. And for those of you in the listening audience, viewing audience, this is going on with you too. You hold this stuff in your body. So you have the chance, you go through the vision quest like I do, or you say, work with me individually, and you go into this dreamlike altered state, all this experience, all those highly charged emotions, those deep thought processes operating from your subconscious, it's all coming back up. You're digesting it. It builds this new foundation. And so as you develop that new foundation, it's freeing you from this baggage, that burden that you've carried, that you drag on through your life, that
Yes.
keeps you at this low level of functioning. You have
Yes.
where you have less brain power and there's that muddle and confusion. You're
Mm-hmm.
working through that. You're gaining clarity,
Yeah.
insight, understanding. You're becoming more highly functional, more present, more engaged.
Yeah.
The quality of your relationships are improving. Your
Yes.
physical health, the cells, the
Yeah.
organs of your body, the systems, they
Yeah.
function better than they did before.
Hmm. Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. I'm so familiar with this whole process and I love it. I'm happy that I've learned of it, and I'm definitely happy that you're even speaking on it in such great depth. It is awesome. A lot of people really need to hear this. They need to
Mhm.
learn to focus and channel in on these types of energies because there's many levels to this,
Mhm.
but the most important thing is to start out doing it, to get started in the
Mhm.
first place, because there's so many people that are so afraid to even get started. They're thinking all these crazy ridiculous thoughts about what it means or what it takes to get involved in it or get started on it, all because of different movies or just because of what someone else has said or because of religious beliefs and things that nature. Get out of that. They need to
Yeah.
let that go, take a chance on something that's extremely natural. It's something that's actually
Mhm.
going to benefit you versus going to see someone just to pay them to lie to you, because that's really what they're doing.
Mhm.
They're really just going to lie to you. They're not going to tell you the truth about what's really going on with you because they want to make money off of you. They don't care what your problems really are. But once you get into meditation, self-healing, self-preservation, and the true ways of identifying oneself, who you really are, there's nothing that you can't heal. There's nothing you can't heal from. Just got to be ready for it.
Some things we want to be a little realistic here is that there are some pretty serious conditions that manifest. I don't want to lead anyone or mislead anyone or anything.
Mhm.
For example, like you have a condition such as ALS or Lou Gehrig's disease, a
Yeah,
degenerative neurological disorder.
yeah.
And I have worked with a few individuals over the years, for instance, with ALS, and I have seen a slowing of the progression.
Mhm.
And maybe it would have been even greater had we worked consistently.
Mhm.
But I don't want to promise, for instance, that it's going to completely eradicate or
Exactly.
completely heal and transform a condition of that severity or magnitude. For I'm not sure how exactly to phrase it, but there's there's a tremendous amount that can heal a lot of the digestive disorders, Crohn's disease, colitis, IBS. I find the vast majority of instances respond extraordinarily well. I
Mhm.
work with people injured in automobile accidents, seriously injured, even traumatic brain injuries.
Mhm.
And yet it's on a continuum, the healing that will be experienced. And I tell people, I don't know if it's going to be 5% or 95%. It's not going to be 100 because, there will be, there's this damage in the body that's
Yeah, definitely.
resulted.
Which causes
And
strain.
yeah, and working with people with traumatic brain injuries, for instance,
Mhm.
and even people who have experienced, I mean, my heart aches sometimes. I see some of these individuals just being very naive, not knowing, and they're experimenting, they're, dropping acid, they're, see people that have used crystal meth and other drugs, and they've done substantial damage. And I'll work with these individuals and I'll see them regain
Mhm.
a lot of the faculties or someone who suffered a stroke, but it's not going to be 100%. It could be pretty substantial difference, but are someone who's done uh, abused opioids,
Mhm.
for years, and it's yeah, we can do a great deal of repair. There's some degree of regain, but we're not going to get 100%. Let's just be realistic here.
True. True. Let's think about I it also makes me think about Bruce Lee.
Yeah,
Bruce Lee was a self-healer.
yeah.
And one of the things that you learn when watching Bruce Lee is that he was realistic about everything that he did in terms of his self-healing, the way he went about his life, and his practices for martial arts and things of that nature. Um, Realistically, everybody should know that there is nothing that's going to ever be 100% guaranteed, with the
Hmm.
exception of us, living and passing away. Those are the only two
Right,
guarantees that we actually have. Someone's going to be born, someone's going to pass away. Those are the
right.
guarantees that we have in actual life. And when I say that pretty much there's nothing that it can't heal, I mean some of those past traumas, those
Hmm.
emotional problems that you're dealing with, those very few physical things you can actually, receive some type of healing from through meditation, but mostly your emotional, your mental state of being, most of those things you can actually get some form of healing, but it'll never be 100%. It'll never be back to where you started. These things, for one, it takes time. It definitely takes time, and you have to be willing to put in the work that it takes to even get yourself to a comfortable position where you can actually get back into society the way that you see fit,
Mhm.
because it's not going to be exactly the way that you once were, but there is something there that can actually help you to cope or to adjust, so there is something for that. I don't want you to assume that I'm saying that everything as far as meditation is concerned, or as far as self-healing, self-preservation. I don't want you to assume that that means that you're going to be 100%. You're going to be the greatest thing ever. You're going to be better than you once were before. No, let's not take that as something that will actually fix every single problem that you've ever had in life. No, we're not
Yeah.
doing that.
I think there are some things like here I'm working with the people with a wide range of health related issues. So for instance, if someone suffers a stroke, there's there's there can be damage, actually some of the brain cells, some areas of the brain are deadened, no longer functioning.
Right.
And yet there's all this other neural real estate that
Mm,
is hasn't been utilized. And so there's with the neuroplasticity, we could
mm.
branch out into those areas and I'll see people regain tremendous functioning.
Yes.
Now, I've had people with digestive issues like colitis or IBS, and some of these individuals I've worked with and have had them get to a place where they
Mm,
have healthy digestive functioning. I mean, they're doing wonderful. They're able to eat what they want, again, within reason, not eat garbage, but eat
exactly.
reasonably healthy foods. And they're
Yes.
no longer in pain or no longer experiencing chronic diarrhea or the
Yeah.
bloating or distension, all these symptoms. It just completely is alleviated. Now, many of these individuals need periodic maintenance after, to maintain that state of good health.
Yes.
I have worked with people. For instance, there's a woman who was on the ski team at the University of New Mexico, and her sacrum and iliac, where the hip and the sacrum, that large triangular shaped bone in the base of your spine where they attach, and it was pulling apart.
Uh-huh.
And so working with her, the first session, it was healing, and then she re-injured after that first session, but then I worked with her again,
Mm.
and she continued to come in for sessions for some time until I moved out of New Mexico. And she never, ever complained again about that injury. It held, even though she was still skiing.
Yes. Yes.
And that, so there are instances where some conditions can thoroughly heal, but
Mm.
it's going to depend on the particular condition or
Yes.
health related issue. That
Yes.
some things are very simple, simplistic, and other things are very complex. But that's why I always want to be straightforward and honest as I'm working with people, and just, working with people with, all kinds of complications.
Mm-hmm.
Some examples where someone attempts to commit suicide, you know, uh, carbon monoxide poisoning, getting into a car and
Exactly.
yeah, and there's some brain
Yes.
damage. It's like, okay, how much of this can we bring back? Well, I don't know. We're just going to have to go in and do what we can. And where
Yes.
there's other mental health issues, the person's experiencing psychoses, or where there's other kinds of traumatic brain injuries, and it's like, well, I don't know how much we can bring back. We just have to go in. And there's a woman in New Mexico years ago that suffered meningitis, and she would say a few words and get lost in space. It'd take her forever to complete a thought. And as I was working with her over time, she just sounded like a normal individual. She was able to carry on a conversation. She was quite lucid and sounded just as intelligent as, you know, eh, our, she was quite intelligent natively. She had that intelligence, but
Uh-huh.
it took the work to bring her to where she could carry on uh,
Exactly.
coherent conversation and stay focused to
Awesome.
communicate. Yeah,
Awesome. I
yeah.
love it. That is awesome. So we're getting close to our time. So tell me, what is one of the most powerful messages that you can give our audience?
I think what's important is several things. Keep yourself open because there are a lot of people that are struggling in one way or another. I carried a lot of wounding from my own childhood and adolescence and was seriously impacted by that trauma. It was very incapacitating in ways. And I was thinking at that time, this is totally unacceptable. I cannot live like this. And I was determined to do whatever it took, any practice, any intervention. So jump in, be willing to explore, be your own little scientist
Mhm.
in a sense. I would explore various practices and interventions. I would test them out thoroughly. There are a lot of things out there that I feel are just like tinkering. I mean, like a friend of mine years ago, he goes through a breakup and he's doing all this crazy tapping all over his body and says, I'm cool, I'm wonderful, it's all okay. And I'm like, dude, you're full of shit. And it was funny, this woman I was working with, she was driving me back to the train station, and all of a sudden my phone rings. It was like, wow, he was just wailing. And she's like in the, driving, and she's looking over like, what the? And so there are some things out there that are just, yeah, these foo-foo, new agey, cheesy interventions that I really don't feel are very powerful. So there's a lot of mediocre stuff. There's bullshit out there. There are people that call themselves master healers after 3 weekend workshops. And I'll say, okay, well, if you needed the intervention of a surgeon or some major dental work, you find out that person has 3 weekends of training. How are you going to have any faith or confidence? So there is a lot of garbage, but you need to get in and explore. One of the most accessible therapeutic interventions that out there, like deep tissue body work, that's really good. It's get deep tissue body work, but explore and be open. There are a number of therapeutic interventions. I had the opportunity to work with a homeopathic physician that was prescribed some remedies that a lot of emotion trapped in my body came out. So it was through that exploration. There were things I tried that weren't very effective. And sometimes some things I knew in one session, but there were a lot of things I had to try them for at least some weeks or months. And over time, I found the practices and the interventions I found most effective. I continue to work with them. When I was in my 20s and experiencing a lot of this trauma, deep emotional wounding, I found the most effective interventions I found were doing the deep tissue body work, the sessions I did with some gifted healers. I worked with some healers like from Brazil and the Philippines and in Sri Lanka as well. And and then when I started going on the vision quest, so for the most part, the interventions I find most effective are, again, the deep tissue body work. If you get to work with a gifted healer such as myself, going through the vision quest, but we need to do consistent daily practice. I do about 2 hours, and most people are not going to do 2 hours, but if you do, I do 2 hours of consistent meditation practice a day. I do an intensive Qigong practice. And all these traditions in China and India, among the Native Americans, they do intensive daily practice. You want to heal, you want to evolve, you want to transform yourself. And I hear people say, oh, I don't have the time. Who has time for that? Really? Well, how much time are you spending scrolling on your device per day? Yeah. You
Exactly.
You
Exactly.
use your time to do what's going to affect the transformation in your life.
Yeah.
And that's where, you get the results and utilize these interventions. Do the body work, work with a gifted healer such as myself. Maybe even you be really hardcore and go on a vision quest. Uh,
Yes.
I do want to say that feel free to reach out to me. There's, depending on what's going on with you, you can go to my website, Ben Oofana, BenOofana.com, BenOofana.com. I guess you'll post the link below the
Definitely.
video.
Definitely.
Yeah, if you're going through a breakup, there's a free ebook you could download, gettingoveryourbreakup.com. If you're
Mhm.
struggling in the midst of a breakup or divorce, abandonment, unrequited love, you can book a free call by going to Refining Relationships. That's relationships plural, refiningrelationships.com. Ufana is also spelled with an N. So Ben Oofana, OOFANA.com. Reach
Definitely.
out to me. A lot of articles, so many articles I've written. So tremendous amount of valuable insight you could gain. Subscribe to my weekly insights, uh, and you could have that delivered to your inbox.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. Are you on any social media platforms, man?
On YouTube, for sure. If you look at Twitter or Facebook, you could see I am a bit political. I was in Sri Lanka during its civil war when the government and military were, oh, it was really tragic. They just slaughtered estimated 40, 70,000 innocent Tamil civilians. And a lot of my friends, their close family members and their friends were killed and disappeared, tortured, mass graves. It was horrendous what was going on.
Yes.
And the government there has never been accountable. But I am overly, unapologetically pro democracy. And, yeah, I'll come right out and say, Trump is a wannabe dictator. And I don't care if I offend some people. We need to get real about this. And
Exactly. For real.
yeah, yeah.
Real.
And
I
our
agree.
democracy is at stake. Get your ass registered to vote.
Yeah.
And I like Biden, whether you like him or not, your
Yeah. I
voting
agree.
Democrat at this point is just for saving our democracy because the
Yes.
Republican Party at this point is no longer a center-right party. It has leaned heavily into this insane Christian nationalism, which is, just this kind of theocratic, just toxic,
Corrupt.
yeah,
Corrupt. Garbage.
corrupt. Yeah,
Let's just be
yeah,
real about it. Let's just be real. It's corrupt. It's garbage. It's tearing our country apart.
it
It's
is.
doing the same thing that it started off with. It started off with violence and it's still trying to end up with violence. So let's be more for the Democratic Party, the people who are actually trying to do something to fix this problem and not
Right.
continue the problem. Let's be
Exactly. If you just look at history, it's like Trump is a reenactment of Benito Mussolini, the Italian dictator, Italian
yeah.
fascism from the 30s and 40s. And,
Hmm.
or you start back in the 20s and, the
Yeah.
same thing, like you see that Pinochet in Chile. And during that time, it's like 30 or so thousand Chileans were
Yeah.
abducted, tortured, disappeared. So this is really serious business, and people are grossly ignorant. It's sadly people are not paying attention, and the
True.
legacy media is really not doing its job as far as,
Yeah.
they're wanting to do this nonsense both sidesism. And it's like, no, I mean, we're dealing with the goddamn fascist, so yeah.
For
So
real.
get serious, people. Wake up, make sure you're registered to vote, get your ass down to the polls, and and even elect Democratic representatives, because the fact that we got these fucking MAGA morons in the House, and it's like they're not passing aid to Ukraine and, the Russia's barbaric invasion,
Yeah.
and they're just like bombing, firing missiles into people's homes, their apartments,
Yeah.
and civilians are dying, and the Ukrainian defenders have not had the armaments to fire back, and so Russia has gained ground. You know, again, you know, it's this, and well, I will offend some people, these fucking MAGA moron Christian nationalist, and it's really not representing anything that Christ himself actually taught.
It's not. It's not. Not at all. Not at all. That's
Yeah,
just real.
call it for what it is. You know,
Yes,
it's just,
indeed.
yeah, yeah. It's a cult. It is a cult. And we need to realize that much of our population is
For
just
real.
caught up in a cult. You know, it's no better than Jim Jones, Jonestown, where all those people drank the
No
Kool-Aid.
better than Hitler.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So,
Exactly.
yeah, wake up. As one person I trained would say, show up, participate, and uh, pay attention.
Yes, indeed. I love it. I love it. Excuse me. Ben Oofana,
Yeah,
everybody.
yeah.
Definitely go out and listen to this gentleman. Definitely check him out on the social media platforms. Check him out on his website, and I will be posting a link once I get this video up. So definitely, everybody, make sure that you are doing what you need to do to be on the better side of things, because
Mhm.
this world isn't getting any better if we don't fight for it.
Right.
It's only going to get worse. So let's put the right people in office. Let's listen to the right people, and let's get the proper help that we need to abandon most of our mental and some of our physical issues. Let's get it together, people. Thank you so much, Ben. Peace and blessings to you, my friend. Thank you so
Thank
much for
you.
being on the show, YTP Entertainment. We love it. We love it, my friend. You have a wonderful and a blessed day. And we are out of here.
Okay. Bye for now. Mhm.
Bye bye. For now. Definitely.